Have you ever stopped to think about how the world would...
Yeah, Dan for Christmas got me a Barber gilet for Christmas. I always feel funny saying gilet, but there's no other words.
And trying to relate the ancient with the modern. No.
Love it.
Could it get more exciting than multiple pockets in a gilet?
No, not for me. Apparently not.
So it was the French who invented castle building. And it worked too.
She was the super nanny, wasn't she?
Right, you go sit on the naughty step.
It's unacceptable.
And together...
Right.
And
why would you ever ask for a small pudding?
Yeah, I know.
I've got no idea why that would even be the case.
I tell you one day...
The best part of a castle, though, was the tower. No. What am I doing? Do it in two.
Welcome, everybody, to the Bakery Bears video show featuring the start of our next historical adventure series. Yes, today is the day when we shall begin England, a castle nation.
So exciting.
Oh yes, over 10 episodes you will join me at castles all across the north of England as we discover the birth of the modern world that we all live in today. And the best part is there's Tudors too.
Yes.
Because it just so happens that story is all very much focused on the Tudors and their direct descendants. And what's so fascinating is, and I've really learnt so much already in the research that I've been doing for this series, because it was in the time of the Tudors that glass became widely used in houses, which led to the introduction of chimney stacks, which led to the introduction of beds as we know them. There's so many things which all came about in this period of time. It's about a 200-year period. And the question that you might ask is, was this just coincidence? Or was there more at work? Do you know what I mean? When something all happens at a particular time, I don't necessarily think that it's just coincidence. Over the course of the series, we're going to find out. Oh, yes. And doesn't Kay look a vision in green today?
Do I?
She looks like a proper gardener.
A proper gardener?
She did the other day down the garden in her brand new...
Oh, yeah, so, Dan for Christmas got me a Barber gilet. And it's green, and it's sort of like made out of this teddy bear sort of fabric. And it's got multiple pockets.
It's like a walking duvet.
Oh, it's marvellous.
You had it on for ages.
I did. I didn't take it off. I came in the house and I was like keeping this on. Kept it on all morning. It's lovely.
That's the beauty of a good outdoor garment. You can go in and out.
Yes.
Not be too warm inside.
Oh, no, it was
lovely. And be just warm enough when you're outside.
I loved the multiple pockets. It's got like pockets at the front like this, but then pockets at the side. So it's effectively got like 4 pockets for all of your like string and what else do you need in the garden? I don't know. I don't think secateurs would fit in it. A bit too big, but all your bits and bobs.
Could it get more exciting than multiple pockets in a gilet?
No, not for me. Apparently not.
Now look, in this brand new series of England, a castle nation, I've seen lots of people how when they read that they hear it in my voice. So I can't not say it now because it's going to spoil the illusion. But yes, in England, a castle nation, it's going to be so exciting because more new music than we've ever had before, which is just spectacular. Also, lots of new production techniques.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I've been busy beavering away on YouTube and in books, learning lots of sort of film techniques on how to produce really great-looking shows. That makes it sound like everything that we've done so far is a load of rubbish.
No, you're just constantly trying to improve and better yourself, aren't you? And what you can do. Yeah.
Which led to extreme frustration and mass disappointment when on this shoot... my lapel mic completely failed.
Yeah.
Utter disaster. So and we'd even got a new piece of kit which was enabling me to record the sound in much higher quality. But unfortunately, I mean, it's just so frustrating.
It is really frustrating.
I even tested it 3 times before I started, and I've never done that before. I've always just relied on it. And I don't know whether it was me testing it, but it read out as if it was working fine. And then I get home and all the voice recording that I'd done of the lapel mic, the close mic, it all sounded like I was like at the bottom of the sea. It was useless. So sincere apologies, like first class sincere apologies that the sound on this particular episode is not as good as it normally would be.
No.
But only when it's distant shots, so it's not like all the way through the episode at all. But still, though, I mean, long-term viewers will know how disappointed
Dan was
and upset.
Dan was so upset
that I am about this.
Yeah, he was really, really upset. But, you know, the realities of it is these things happen, don't they?
They do. Fear not, because I capture the audio twice on a shoot, and I've always done that just in case there was ever a problem. This time there was backup audio into action. I must just tell you, there has been in my life a number of times, 3 to be exact, when I have been musically inspired. Isn't that exciting? I can tell you the 3 times. And you perhaps, I mean, the first time you may be able to guess. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't at all. I
can't even guess.
Well, no, you wouldn't.
No.
I happened to go to a very close friend of mine at the time's house. I'd known him for a long time at the time. He was a bass player, and bass players and drummers are always like that anyway. And he got out this LP, and I've got a copy. He gave me a copy. Yes. He gave me a copy of the LP. It's somewhere around. I mean, how amazing is that? He had 2 copies, which he'd bought.
I can only think of one LP that I used to see all the time, but go on.
Well, this particular LP that he put on was by Jaco Pastorius.
Yes.
And the album is Invitation, and it came out in 1983. And he played a song called The Chicken. And it has on drums someone who I loved already, but after hearing this particular performance, then he became my drumming muse. And his name was Peter Erskine. So Peter Erskine was on drums. There was all sorts. There was the Brecker brothers are playing on it. All sorts of amazing musicians on this particular recording. I was like in heaven. I remember sitting back in this chair, and I felt just lightheaded because this piece of music was so like amazing. That was The Chicken by Jaco Pastorius. The second time, would you believe, it was the Foo Fighters. And their album, I always call the album the wrong thing. And Wasting Light. It's spelled checked to Eating Light. Don't look for that album, because it doesn't exist.
Wasting Light?
Yes.
What does that even mean?
I don't really know.
Okay.
But what happened was I watched a Foo Fighters documentary, and the documentary, it finished up with them singing the first song of this particular album. And I was like, oh my goodness, I need to go look at that album. And I was just obsessed with that album for a long time. Really sort of musically inspired me, and not as much as The Chicken. The Chicken was like, you know, one of those golden moments. And then a moment came to beat The Chicken and to utterly obliterate the Foo Fighters. And I'm not even sure how it came about, because
No, I'm not sure either.
I've always been aware of the band Journey. Can't really say I'm a fan.
No.
Have great respect for their second drummer, their longest tenured drummer, a guy called Steve Smith. But never been a Journey fan. And then for some reason, I think I was going on to YouTube with our daughter Bryony to put on Fail Army to have a good laugh at people slipping over.
Yeah.
And I think it just came up as a recommended.
Right.
And I think it said Journey live in concert.
Right.
In Sacramento, I think in 2022. And I was like, oh my goodness, they must be really old now.
Yeah.
I'll have a look.
Yeah.
So I put it on, and what looked like a member of BTS comes out.
Yeah.
And he starts singing, and I couldn't take my eyes off the screen.
Literally.
I am
you
like,
couldn't.
I cannot look away. This guy was performing like Freddie Mercury, but not like himself. Such a small guy, massive voice, but he's all over the stage. He's jumping around, but at no point does he lose his vocal quality.
No.
Sometimes the girls who run around the stage, you know, with great activity, you can hear them sort of huffing and puffing a bit. This guy is unbelievable, and his name is Arnel Pineda. Now, it sounds interesting, that name, because he's actually from the Philippines, and he is... I'm speechless.
Yeah, Dan literally. I can't recall seeing Dan like this. You know, it was literally like you. Can you just listen to this? Just listen. It honestly was speechless.
And subsequently, I found recordings of him singing with Chicago. I found recordings of him singing Toto songs, and these are all they're musically extremely difficult things to go and perform, and he just totally blasts it out of the park.
Just amazing. And the other amazing thing about him is he looks 20. I'm not kidding. This man looks like he's 20 years old.
He's 56.
Honestly, we were like...
Power to all of us.
Even like completely up close.
He's 56.
He looks honestly like he's in his 20s. Amazing. You know, and he does look like he should be in a young boy band.
Yes, you could put him on stage with BTS and you wouldn't think, what's that old guy doing there?
And then he comes out on stage and he belts out like, you know, a voice you would not expect to come out of this person.
I will pop a link in the show notes to one particular song who I made a Valentine's Day playlist.
Dan made me a playlist for Valentine's. It's so sweet. It's got 14 songs on it because it's Valentine's. And one of them is the song that Dan's linked to because there's a video attached. And it's amazing. It's beautiful, beautiful song, but just sung so like amazingly. And it's live, and I think they were in Tokyo.
That's right. It's the 2017 performance. It was a tour that they did, but they were specifically celebrating their Frontiers and Escape album. If you have Apple Music, that whole concert is available on Apple Music. You can just watch it. But you can get it on DVD. You can find lots of the performances on YouTube. It is
amazing.
Stupendous.
So he's like 50. He will have been 50 at the time, won't he?
But the first thing I saw him doing was from 2022 when he was 54, nearly, 6 years older than me now.
Yeah.
And he is moving with more fluidity than I have in 15 years.
The way he moves around the stage and his presence and everything is so young and vibrant. Is like a sort of like mystical creature out of the, you know, it's unbelievable. Honestly, just go watch.
Anyway, what a happy way to start today's show.
Indeed.
Oh, yes. With a lovely new series coming your way. Sincere apologies again for the sound.
I don't know what you just said. Sincere apologies for the sound is what you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also with a recommendation.
It's perfectly watchable.
Oh, yes, it's Fear Not.
It's perfectly watchable.
Fear Not.
You know, but it's just not at that standard that Dan usually produces.
It's not acceptable.
So technology fail. Won't happen again.
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the words of
Joe Frost.
Thank you very much.
I love her accent. She was the super nanny, wasn't she?
Right. You go sit on the naughty step.
It's unacceptable.
And together we will find out, Kay Jones, what's on your needles?
Okay, so the first thing today now, there's a story to this pair of socks. The story of this pair of socks begins with our lovely editor, Jen. Now, Jen posted a video. She's got a YouTube channel, Jen Likes Yarn. And
that's the name of the channel. That wasn't Kay making a statement.
It's a statement and the name of the channel, Jen Likes Yarn, Jen with 2 N's. And she posted a video reviewing, it was like an unboxing of this sort of kit that she'd just got from Ruby and Roses. And it was a Taylor Swift kit. Now, I will preface all of this by saying that I wasn't particularly a fan of Taylor Swift. However, our daughter Bryony is a fan. So my ears pricked up and I was like, oh, I'm going to have a little look at this. So I watched it and it was a beautiful kit. It had, I think Jen got like 2 skeins of yarn and some other stuff as well. And it was lovely. So, and it was the skein of yarn that really drew me in was, it was very highly speckled. It was really beautiful. So I thought, oh, I'm going to go and have a look at Addie's shop. Addie is the dyer behind Ruby and Roses. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of her shop. Now, she didn't have any of these kits left in the shop, but then I looked on her Instagram and I saw she was going to have this big Taylor Swift update a few days ago now it was. I think it was on the 11th of February. A pre-order for all of these colourways that she created. So I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, I will do that. I will have a look at that, because this was like a week or so before she was doing that pre-order. It was a little while before. And so I couldn't order it. I just couldn't get this colourway out of my head that I'd seen Jen unboxing. So I thought, do you know what? I've got dyes and I've got yarn, and I can just go and have a go at dyeing my own. So I did that, and that's what I'm knitting. I did then subsequently go and look at the pre-order when it came up on the 11th, and I chose 2 skeins of yarn. I put them in my cart and I went through the whole process. However, I didn't finish off the order because, unfortunately, the shipping was really expensive and there were also taxes applied. Now, I think in some states in America, you get extra taxes, and I think in others you don't. I don't really understand the ins and outs of it. But the long and short of it was that to purchase 2 skeins of yarn, one of them was a sock set and one of them was just a skein on its own, it was going to cost me £85, which is about $100-ish US dollars. And that's it was just too much. I couldn't justify paying effectively $50 a skein for each of the 2 yarns. So I didn't go ahead with that purchase. But I am knitting these socks, which I dyed up the yarn it was fully inspired by one of the colourways that Addie was dyeing up and is in her shop. I couldn't tell you the name of the colourway, but I'll show it to you and then you'll be able to see which one it is, because there was only really one that looked sort of like this. So this particular colourway, I think it was inspired by the album cover on an album called Lover, and it was kind of like blues and pinks with like a hint of sort of like purple and a hint of yellow. So those were the colours that I chose. And I dyed up a skein of yarn, and I also dyed a mini in sort of lipstick red, because Taylor Swift wears that red lipstick, doesn't she? So I dyed up a mini as well. And I'm knitting a pair of socks, and I've got to say, I love this yarn. I don't think I've ever dyed yarn like this to show you, do you know, when I do my dyeing videos. I've not dyed up anything that's really exactly like this, because it's micro speckles and it's lots of different colours. To get this sort of clear micro speckles on a sort of white background, it is quite time consuming and quite tricky. I think I managed it because I think this sock just looks great. So here's the sock. Oh, I hope you can see just all the teeny tiny coloured speckles. Look at that. So I used is there 2 blues in there, or maybe there's just 1 blue? I used 2 different pinks. I used a yellow and a really pretty purple as well, just for hints of purple, and it's just lovely. So what Bryony wanted was just a red cuff. So we've gone for lipstick red cuff. Even though this red, I'll show you the red separately, it didn't come out red enough for me. It's a little bit on the pink side. I don't know how it's coming across on screen, but to my sort of naked eye, it is a little bit on the pink side, because I used, I think, 3 different reds for this, and one of them it might have been Scarlet from Jacquard. And I think that might be a little bit leaning pink, but I did also add in just a touch of a really bright pink, because I didn't want a sort of orange leaning red. I did want a more blue leaning red, so I'll pop that in as well. But yeah, that was the red, and it's on Sparkle Mini because I thought that would be fun. And Bryony just wanted the cuffs red, so we've got a lipstick cuff, and then the rest of the sock will be in all of these lovely speckles. So I think I'm just about to finish the gusset decreases and then be onto the foot. But it's just such a pleasure to knit because of all these super, super teeny speckles. It is quite tricky to get them like this, and you've seen me dye speckled yarn loads of times, and you just need like a really small amount of water. That really is the key, because if you've got a lot of water in there, you're not going to get speckles. It's just going to spread into the water. So minimal amount of water and some patience. You've got to speckle it on, and then you've got to leave it until it's fully set. And I moved the skein, I think, at least twice to re-speckle, to make sure that I got speckles all over the skein. And I do still think that sort of in the middle of this skein there might be less speckling. It's a really difficult thing to get completely even speckles through a skein, I find, but we'll see how it goes with the second sock. I'm not too worried about that anyway. Bryony really likes them. So I'm just doing a plain sock. She wanted a reasonably long leg, so I did 50 rounds, I think, for the leg. So I did 15 rounds of 2x2 for the cuff, 50 rounds for the leg, and then I'm still a little bit obsessed with a garter. Oops, nobody told me that my other needle was just stuck in there. I'm a little bit obsessed still with the garter edged heel flap, so I'm still doing those, and then just straight down the foot, so it's just plain, because I think when you've got a yarn like this, you just want to see the yarn and the speckles. So I didn't want to put any sort of pattern into it that would draw your eye away from the speckles, because they're just so pretty. The pink's gorgeous. It's a really hot pink. Now, I only dyed one skein of this because it's just for me. So this literally is just for me. I've dyed one skein and that's it. Double points for these, because I really love knitting plain socks on double points. And 2.5mm, what are these? Knit Picks Sunstruck. They're my favourite double points. I absolutely love them. Really enjoy knitting those, and I would really like to crack on with these and have them finished for next show, because I want Bryony to have these. But I also want the leftovers. I really want the leftovers, and I'm really hoping there might be enough for me to have a shorty pair of socks. If I do cuffs, heels and toes in another colour, because cuffs, heels and toes I use about, for a medium-sized sock, 64 stitches, I use about 8 grams for cuffs, heels and toes on one sock. And I know that a shorty pair of socks for me usually weighs just over 50 grams. So that's, let's say it's 27 grams per sock. So if 8 grams of that is cuffs, heels and toes, what did I say? 27 grams. So just less than 20 grams is what I need for a sock. So hopefully I might have 40 grams left. And if I do, I should have enough for a shorty pair of socks for me, because I'd really like that. And I'm going to dye up the hot pink fuchsia as a mini for me. I think that'd be so cool, won't it? So yeah, that's my Taylor Swift inspired ode to pair of socks. Thank you, Jen, for the inspiration, and Addie for the inspiration. Dan Jones?
Yes.
What's on your needles?
So whilst Kay was showing you her sock, there was much disaster going on.
Oh, sorry, was there?
Yeah, I think I definitely do need to not use these needles anymore. They're too slippy.
They're too slippy.
Because I started knitting on my Sherwood socks, and what happened was I knitted the first stitch, purled the second 2 stitches like it is on every round.
Yeah.
And then I needed to do cable.
Yes. So
I let go of the needle.
And they all dropped out.
And the needle just dropped straight down on the floor.
Okay, we need to give you some different needles.
So
Chowgoo might be good, because Chowgoo metals do have a bit of drag.
So live. Take a look live whilst I talk about my other what's on my needles. Look, I have a needle there for you too. It's the middle stitch that dropped down the worst. But I was impressed with myself for catching the stitches.
Did you see it? Obviously, I didn't see him do all this.
Oh, well, yeah, I hopefully will have edited it so that they didn't see the drama.
Oh, right, okay.
Because it would have been like an end of EastEnders.
I think the thing is as well, your gauge is sort of loosened up.
That's all lovely, but...
And because your stitches are loose on the needles, I think that's another reason that...
You did say yourself...
These are very slippy needles. These are the Knit Pro Cubics that Dan likes to use, but I've had to fix drop stitches a couple of times on this pair of socks, and they're very, very slippy. Oh, that doesn't look right. How many did it drop down?
Well, I think the middle one dropped down at least 2.
Oh, there's more than one stitch that's dropped down. Right,
yeah, 3.
Okay.
Those 3 stitches have all dropped down.
Okay.
So whilst you do surgery...
Yes.
I shall talk about my amazing Goldie.
Carry on talking.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Sorry.
I shall talk about my amazing... Now, I have got to say that since I reintroduced into my knitting schedule the Let Lopi yarn and the colourwork yoke sweaters, everything just feels lovely again. I really went through a sort of challenging period. Do you know when your projects aren't quite right and the balance doesn't feel right and you're knitting and you're enjoying yourself, but I suppose a lot of people would say their mojo had gone. I still had my motivation to knit. I mean, it's a funny one. Something just wasn't quite right. The balance wasn't there. Now it is. There's just something wonderful about knitting with this yarn. And for me personally, it really is like perfection. And I think it's because you can very much just get on with something like colour work and you don't have to worry too much. But I think what I've developed in my wearing habits through the winter and also with the series that I've done over the last few years, and it's particularly appropriate that we're, starting England a Castle Nation today, because through the series, at times I have worn the jumpers, and they are just the most wonderful things to wear. So now the knitting of a new one, for me, it feels lovely, because I just know that when it's finished, and do you know what? That's such a new experience for me, because if you're a long-term watcher of the show, if you've seen episodes past, I've historically always said that I don't knit for myself, and I still don't feel like I particularly do. But just what I found is, when it comes to these, I don't think I could ever have enough. The colours are just spectacular. I mean, do you remember what this reddy colour's called, Kay?
Yeah, the ball band will be in your bag, probably.
Yes. It won't say, though. So the three colours that I'm using there, it is 1419. It would be so nice if they put the name on as well.
It would be.
Because it's always
right,
short words, isn't it? It's never like long.
No.
1417 and also 1707. And I have a feeling that the 1707 is the reddy colour. Is that red?
It's like a brick red, isn't it, kind of?
That you've nailed it there. I mean, it really is brick red.
Is it brick red?
Now, with the colours, I'm terrible at picking colours, and Kay's a genius at it. So Kay amended the colours slightly, but this brick reddy colour, this is the one that's in the pattern, that's in the design itself, and it's in. I'll link in the show notes below because it's from one of the books. I can't remember which book it is in particular, but you can buy it separately. And the construction is pretty much, because that's one of the challenges that I've had. It's with the construction of things, and as you become more experienced as a garment knitter, you start to learn more and more, don't you, how things just go together. So even if something doesn't make too much sense when you're reading it in the pattern, like for example on the Aaron Harper Gansey, that took more concentration to understand what was going on. What's so lovely for me is because I've knitted a few of these, it just all comes together. No, honey, it needs a double thumbs up. Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry, we'll talk about it in a minute. Carry on, darling.
That's the Godie, knitted through the ribbing.
What's it called?
Godie.
How do you spell that?
G-O-D-I.
Oh, right, okay. That's unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, because I keep wanting to say Gobi, but then that'd be desert. And trust me, you would not want one of these on walking through a desert. Although maybe you would at night.
I was just about to say that.
At night time, definitely.
Freezing at night time in deserts?
Through the day, you'd be carrying it.
You would?
Cool. So yes, that is the Godie. Really enjoying it. Amazing yarn. It was a challenge to start with, as I've mentioned in previous shows, but that is just normal. When you start knitting with Let Lopi, you do need to adjust the way that you approach your yarn management, because it just doesn't respond like any other yarn I've ever worked with. It will break so easily. And just, you get back in the swing of it so fast. First one I ever knitted is a different ball game. I was breaking it all the time. With this, I broke it on the first round after cast on.
Did.
The one thing you don't want to be doing
more than once, I seem to remember,
is wet splicing.
No.
On the first round after cast on. It was very sort of wispy, this red. These two, they're not so much.
You do find, don't you, that different colours are kind of different.
Yeah. The Galaxy.
Yeah.
No. Oh, yes, it was. The Galaxy was bad.
You are using Galaxy in that, aren't you?
Only a tiny bit.
Only a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, What else is on your needles?
Before I move on, I'm just reminding you that my previous cast on the Taylor Swift
Thank you
socks
so much, caller.
were a new cast on.
Woohoo.
And...
We've adjusted it already.
Oh, right. It's already been adjusted because we missed one last time because I had a finished item, which was the hat for Bryony's boyfriend, but that was also a new cast on. So that's already been adjusted. Thank you for the eagle-eyed person who spotted that. I have got another new cast on.
Amazing.
And
Congratulations.
thank you very much. This is another pair of socks, and this is for Dan because I finished his latest pair of socks and I'm going to show you those later on. So it meant I needed to cast on another pair immediately because I feel very like I've got to knit Dan loads of socks right now, and I know he will say don't be daft, but he just seems to have worn through loads of socks all at the same time. So I'm kind of in a bit of a panic that he's going to, rapidly run out of socks. So I cast on a pair the very same day that I finished the last pair, and just checking my book, I cast these on the 10th of February. So I finished the last pair on the 10th of February, cast these on the same day. So I was going to cast on, I wound up this yarn, and this is what I was going to cast on. And I'm still going to do these ones fairly soon, I think. So I was going to use this yarn, which is a beautiful colourway from Pixie Yarns called Michaelmas. Matches my jumper. So I was going to cast this one on. I've wound it up, as you can see. But then I received an order that I placed that came much quicker than I thought it would. And it arrived and I was like, no, okay, I'll do the green ones next. I need to cast on this yarn immediately. So I did. So this yarn that I've cast on, this is the first time I've purchased from this shop, actually. It's from Polka Dot Creek, and she is a Canadian dyer. The lady's name is Shelley, and she's from Airdrie, Alberta. I feel like that's going to be a beautiful place. I don't know, but it just sounds like it will be amazing. And this colourway is a self-striping sock set, and she just did 2 colourways for the NFL teams that were competing in the Super Bowl. So the Super Bowl was the weekend just gone, and it was the San Francisco 49ers against the Chiefs. So, of course, I've got San Francisco yarn. Because although our team, as you all know, is the Detroit Lions, they got knocked out. We very much like the 49ers, so I was like, yes, I need some 49ers socks for Dan. So it's the San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl sock set. So in this sock set, it's actually a 50-gram skein of the yarn, of the self-striping, and then you get a 20-gram mini, a football brown, come on. So we've got an American football brown, how cool is that? Now, when I ordered this, I did think it was really cheap, and I was like, that's bizarrely inexpensive, but okay, because I just quickly ordered it because I was worried it was going to go out of stock. So I didn't realise it was a 50-gram skein. Now, I would have had enough, just enough to knit Dan a shorty pair of socks with this. However, I wanted leftovers because I wanted to either knit a pair of socks for me in it or mitts for me. 49ers mitts would be very cool. So I wanted leftovers. So I then ordered another set. I went onto a shop and I was like, she's not going to have any more in stock. And she did. The Chiefs had sold out, but the 49ers was still there. So I've also got one in the skein. Look. How cute. So the 49ers colours are red, gold, white, and then like a dark grey. If you look at their logo, that's the colours in their logo. Predominantly their colours in their strip, in their uniform, is red, white and gold, but there is that dark grey on the logo, which is lovely to have that in there. So yeah, I've got another skein. So what I'm going to do is I'm knitting the first sock with this one, and I'll knit the second sock with this one, and then I'm going to have the leftovers, which will be absolutely lovely. So this second skein, right, came, if it was a week, that was the most it took from Canada to here. I couldn't believe it when it arrived. I was like, what? So I messaged Shelley straight away because when I received the first parcel with this, she sent me the most beautiful parcel with such a lovely note in it. The second one just came just as fast. So, the service was fantastic. And she, like I said, she sent me such a lovely parcel, such a lovely note in there as well to say she watched the show. And it was just so sweet, because I never presume anybody knows who we are, especially when it's Canada or America. I'd never presume that. So that was lovely.
It's because a huge amount of people don't know.
True, and we live in a little town in the north of England, and it's just never on my radar that anybody would know who we are.
You order a lot of yarn, and
it
was sort of poetic that the American football one, the San Francisco yarn, happened to be from someone who did know who we were.
I sent her a message and I said, Shelley, next year you're going to be dyeing up Detroit Lions yarn.
And she told us.
And then she said to me, we did actually have sort of in preparation a Lions colourway in case they got to the Super Bowl. I was like, oh, that's heartbreaking. But I said, next year you're going to be dyeing that yarn up and I'm going to be on it. So here's my lovely sock that I've started for Dan. I'm only on the leg of the first sock, but the stripes are just lovely, aren't they? So nice. So for Dan's socks, as always, I've done 72 stitches. I'm on 2.5mm needles, and I've done a 2x2 cuff for this one, 15 rounds. I didn't want to do a full rib sock. I just wasn't in that zone. But I did want to do something in this sock. So what I've done, I think it looks really nice. I might have done this before on a sock for Dan. He says it looks familiar. But I've done 3 rounds plain knit and then 1 round knit 2 purl 2. So you just get a little bit of texture. And I think it looks really nice. And so far, bizarrely, when I do the knit 2 purl 2, for the most part, it's fallen within the coloured stripes. So I'm not getting many purl blips. I'm sure that won't carry on down the sock. I'm not bothered. I quite like the purl blippiness. There's a little bit here, you can see at the top. I quite like that. And it's lovely yarn. Very, very pleasant to knit with. And I can't wait to get to the heel, because I'm going to do heels and toes in football brown. That'll be very exciting. So just really lovely to knit something sort of football inspired. I've made up my own kind of things, but I've never had a self-striping yarn that feels like, football yarn. So that's really cool. And I was working on these on Super Bowl Sunday. Unfortunately, they lost. The 49ers lost. Deep sadness. But, next year's another year.
You should have MCDC on your on your nails. Bryony was going to do your nails, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, that would have been so cool.
Yeah, if the Lions had got to the Super Bowl, I said, Bryony, you can do my nails in Lions blue with what was I going to have on them? Lions written on one hand, I think, on each of my nails.
Oh, you could have had Lions on one and MCDC on the other.
MCDC on the other.
Do you know what that stands for?
Yeah, it's Dan Campbell, isn't it?
Motor City.
Motor City Dan Campbell, because he loves
AC/DC.
Yeah.
No, not AC/DC.
Not AC/DC.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
He likes really heavy rock, doesn't he?
Yes.
Metal, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway.
We'll save that for our metal podcast.
And we'll save that for next year, when the Detroit Lions will be going to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs are not going to win again. So, lovely. Football socks.
Cool. So, look, haven't seen these, have you? It's my Sherwood socks. I didn't accidentally drop stitches earlier on in the show and Kate fixed them. It's the first time you've seen them. And genius move. You had put those stitches onto the needle. So I just left them on the needle because you'd added them to the...
Yes.
Yeah.
I put them where they need to be.
No, you didn't. But that's totally fine.
I did.
No, you didn't. It's fine. It's totally fine. I know what you'd done.
Oh, okay.
So Kay had added them next to the gusset stitch.
Oh, I apologise.
No, it's perfect, because I was like, I can't knit on these because the same thing might happen again. But because you'd done that, I knew I had the security of knitting across.
Oh, right, okay.
And then I just slipped the stitches over and boom, everything's done. So these are the business. I love these more than the other ones that I've just finished, the Whispers in the Walls.
Colour.
These are my absolute favourites. And I just...
Let's show you the pattern on the front.
It's the whole Robin Hood theme, and just, you know, the sort of... The green colour is like the ultimate sort of foresty, lovely green, and it totally goes with Kay's jumper.
I know, it's the
It's
green.
like perfection.
The green show today, isn't it?
So
I dyed this yarn. Can't remember how I did it.
the needles are a little bit slippy.
Yeah, so these are the needles. It's the Knit Pro Cubics, but they're really, really slippy. I think you should try Chow Goose, the metal ones,
Okay.
because, or even, you won't like them. You won't like the Adi Calibri because the ends are different. We'll give the Chow Goose a go because Chow Goose do have a bit of drag. They're like a brushed finish. These are like really highly polished.
Yeah, it's just a bit too much.
Yeah, they're just flying off like nobody's business.
I think if it wasn't the issues I seem to have had is when you're doing fancy stuff.
Yeah.
Perhaps if I was just plain knitting with these, perhaps I'd be okay.
Yeah, but you don't ever plain knit socks because you don't like it.
No,
So
it's boring. So,
might be boring for you.
well, yeah, I meant for me.
Yeah.
So, lovely socks, one of our platinum collection patterns. And stay tuned if you want to hear more about platinum patterns, because in Endy Bits we'll be talking about the release of the next platinum pattern, which is coming on the 1st of March.
1st of March.
Yes. So, Sherwood socks.
Yes.
Change of needles for next time, I would think. What else is on your needles?
So the last thing I've got to show you today is my reading shawl that I'm working on, my Scrappy reading shawl, because I thought it might be interesting to see how much I've done since the last time, because I told you that I'm only doing 2 rows a day. I might have done 4 yesterday because I skipped one at the weekend. So yeah, but generally 2 rows a day is what I'm doing. So I thought it might be interesting to show you how much I've knit since last time. So this is like 2 weeks now. I suppose on the face of it, it doesn't look a huge amount, but I don't need to knit a huge amount every day to have this finished for when I want it finished by. So this shawl, I mean, it's looking quite big now, isn't it? This is my pattern called My Reading Shawl, and that design was designed using an advent calendar of minis. There's 12 sections on it, and you hold the minis double. So it's fingering weight held double, this shawl. But for this one, I'm just doing a scrappy version. So I'm just following the directions in terms of the construction and how many stitches I've got to get to at the end, you know, before I put on the picot border. But other than that, I'm just changing yarns really whenever I run out, and I'm just using leftovers. So when I last showed you, if I hold it like this, I just started this kind of beigey coloured stripe here next to the pink. And I've knit this much since then. So, I mean, it doesn't look like a huge amount, but I have got a lot of stitches on there now. I think I'm up to, it's well over 200 stitches. So a row takes, you know, it takes a little bit of time. I haven't timed myself, but I'm guessing a row might take me 10 minutes or so now, because I'm not the fastest knitter in the world. So I've gone through this beigey, and then I decided to put in this mad neon, which you can see here. There's only a little bit of it because I ran out of one of the colours after that amount, but I just quite like that little neon pop. And then I went into a colour which is like there's sort of like a rust colour going through there with greys, and now I've got green because I thought we'd not had green. Not really had green at all because that's blue, that's sort of like blue. So this is the first time we've had green. And this one is, when I'm nearly out of this, what I need to do, I need some more. Now I'm getting through the shawl and the stitch count is higher. I'm finding that I need larger quantities of leftovers to make a nice little chunk. And I do have quite a lot of minis in here that are full 20 grams. But then I'm now not going to use the ones that are tiny. These ones are only sort of probably less than 10 because I'm just not getting enough of a chunk. But I've only got this amount left of the 2 that I'm using right now. So I'll carry on until these are gone. They look about the same weight. So I'll carry on until one of them's disappeared, and then I'll change yarns. But the next colour I'm going to use is this one. I dyed this one and I've got a big chunk of it. This gorgeous pink. This is the Barbie colourway that I dyed. So I'm going to use that, and I'll probably hold it together with if I've got a 20-gram mini somewhere, and if I haven't, I'll have one in my stash that I've not wound up. So that's not 20 grams, but I'm going to find another pink that will sort of pick up the paler tones in there. That one's probably a bit too light. But I'll find a 20-gram of pink or something, a speckly. That one's not, it's a bit too light. Anyway, I don't need to go through my bag of leftovers. But I'm still really enjoying it, and only doing that little bit every day. I keep thinking, at some point I should design something, because I'm always doing this thing, aren't I, where it's 2 rows a day. For ages I was doing 2 rows a day on crochet blankets, and then I'm now doing...
That was because of your injuries, wasn't it?
2 rows a day, yeah, and I am going to be starting something crochet soon. Yeah, and this is just 2 rows a day. I feel like I need to design something that's called 2 rows a day. I don't know what it would be, but yeah, we'll see. So that's my lovely reading shawl, which is coming along beautifully.
Is that the one which you started picking the yarns and then you stopped?
Yeah, this is the 3rd time I cast it on, because I didn't like the first ones I was doing.
So the first time you stopped that one because
I started with a really dark colour at the top and I didn't like it. That's the reason I stopped that one. Right. And then I started another one, and then that time I didn't like the fact that I couldn't choose the yarns. I was telling myself I just had to just randomly put my hand in the bag and use whatever yarn came out.
Right.
And I was doing that, but it did 2 things. One, I wasn't able to choose the colours myself, but also it was giving me pearl blips, because I was like changing the yarn anywhere, it just ran out, which meant I might have like a bigger row of pearl blips on the right side, and I wasn't keen on that. So now I'm choosing the colours myself, and I'm changing colours at the beginning of a row as it's described in the pattern. And that's much more my thing, being able to choose the colours is the key thing for me.
I wonder why it is that you decided to do one where you weren't picking the colours.
I just thought it might be fun.
Right.
It wasn't.
Well, it just seems such a funny thing to do, because you always say, we were only talking the other day, I asked Kay what her favourite sock pattern was, and you were like saying, well, half of it for me is the yarn that I'm knitting with.
Yeah.
So to not pick, to be forced...
I know, I don't know why I thought I'd like it. I don't know, I was just trying something new.
Right.
I suppose it's good to try something new, isn't it?
It is.
But then... you discover that you know yourself and you're like, there's just no point.
So that is your reading shawl, and
yes.
It is just so lovely. It reminds me so much, whenever I see that reading shawl, it makes me think of Neapolitan ice cream.
Does it?
It does. I think it's because...
not remotely Neapolitan.
It's because of the layers.
Oh, right, okay.
I remember, being so excited at school. You know, when you were at No, you weren't... No, I don't mean that, because it was a long time... Oh, no, this has all gone wrong.
I don't know what he's going to say.
Do you recall being excited at school when dinners came out?
Some days, yeah. Some of the
Excellent. What days?
The days when, for the pudding.
Yes.
We used to have this thing, and it was called we always called it a wagon wheel. It wasn't what it was, right? It was like a shortbread biscuit.
Right.
And it was in a spiral, it was round, and there was 2 colours of shortbread. There was a chocolate colour and there was a plain colour. And what they'd done is they'd put one on top of the other and then rolled them and then cut them like that.
Goodness.
So you got the 2 colours, and then they used to serve it with custard.
Wow.
That was my favourite.
Goodness.
Oh, I loved that.
You see, for me, I always got really excited when it was Viennetta.
Look, we did not have Viennetta. And you went to a posh school, honey.
And I also got very excited if we got Neapolitan ice cream.
We never had that either.
What was interesting was, when it was Viennetta or ice cream, you just got what you were given. Any other day, you could either have a small, medium or large.
Right.
And
why would you ever ask for a small pudding?
Yeah, I know.
I've got no idea why that would even be the case.
I tell you, one day, when no one asked for medium or large.
Semolina or tapioca or something.
Which is the frog spawn one?
Tapioca.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, I'm convinced that they gave you all a large portion. Because they thought, it's good for you.
Tapioca is the thing that goes into that...
boba tea.
Tea, that bubble tea. I can't even look at that tea.
No.
Because it looks like frog spawn at the bottom of your cup.
I don't
Sorry.
want to drink that. I just don't have a cup
I know
of
it's
tea.
popular, but
Can I just have a cup of tea, please?
And then you get these big straws so that you can suck up
You
the.
choke on it. It's gone down the wrong way.
I can't even.
Look,
No.
way back in 2020, we started an odyssey through the history of Britain. And that was, of course, with the series Walk in the Dales. Yes. We sort of didn't realise that we were going to sort of start charting. I remember that first walk where we were looking
Which one was the first
we were looking
one?
at rock art.
Oh, yes,
And we were looking at a settlement up on the hill,
I remember.
Arkengarthdale, and it was just the most spectacular journey. Walking the Dales led us through Walking the Wall.
Yeah.
We picked up the Roman history, carried on the story of England.
Yeah.
Walking the Wall took us forward, and we then picked up the story again with the rise and fall of the monasteries, starting with St Hilda in the 7th century. And now it's time to pick up the story of the castle, because whilst the castle arrived with William the Conqueror, as we're going to find out, it was in the years following through the sort of Tudor era that it really hit its heights. So join me now as we discover the story of the castle in England, a castle nation.
Have you ever thought how the world we live in today came to be? Why do so many of us live in houses made from bricks? How do most of us end up in a supermarket every week? How did some of us get the surnames we have? And why even do many modern day jobs exist?
The thing I love the most about history is we can get the answers to all this and so much more. It's always fascinated me when I've looked back through time to try and identify the things which relate to you and me today. And in this series, that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and marry the ancient with the modern. We're going to take a look at the end of the ancient world, a world that our ancestors knew so well. And we're going to tell the story of how it all started to change and become the modern world that you and I live in today.
"1,000 years ago, this is what the majority of England looked like. The houses we lived in were simple wooden structures, and the lives that most of us led were rustic and hard, to say the least. But a change was on the horizon. A technological innovation from the continent was about to burst onto the scene that would completely transform the lives of all of us.
The dawn of the castle had come, and in this series, we're going to discover its story. Why were these spectacular and sometimes terrifying buildings invented, and why were so many constructed so quickly?
And then it gets really interesting, because how did this medieval structure, reminiscent of the buildings of ancient Rome, come to inspire completely the towns and cities of England, from the houses we live in to the shops we buy from? Along the way, we're going to tell the story of the kings and queens who unsuspectingly ushered in this change, and who set us on a path no one could have expected, to civil war and the formation of a republic.
This is a truly epic tale that I can't wait to tell you. Welcome to England, a castle nation. So this is it, the start of a truly great adventure. And as I stand here on top of the Norman Tower at Richmond Castle, it's so exciting to think about all that's to come this series. Over 10 episodes, you're going to join me at castles all over the north of England.
We're going to uncover their story, but we're also going to uncover the story of the surrounding settlements at an absolutely key time in English history. As we venture through this series, we're going to discover threads of information, and when we pull on them, it's going to uncover mind-blowing links to the world you and I live in today. What's so exciting this series is we'll actually be spending 2 episodes at some of our main destinations, so we can really dig into the story.
But in this episode, we're going to do things a little bit different. In the first part, we're going to discover the story of the birth of the castle. Who invented them and how on earth did they get here? And in part 2, we're going to discover the layout of a castle, because castles are a little bit like medieval monasteries. The layout's all fairly similar. So we'll visit our first castle, this one actually, and we'll learn a little bit about some of the rooms and also some of the areas of the castle and what went on here. But where does our story start? Who invented castles? And why on earth did they do it? The answer to that question lies right down there on the banks of the River Swale.
The roots of the world that we live in today, I believe, start around the year 793 AD. It wasn't when the Romans arrived. They'd actually left 393 years before. And after they left, the country split off into 7 different kingdoms. And the technologies that the Romans had brought with them were slowly forgotten. The majority of the country looked very much like this. It was very rustic, full of trees, very rural. The houses that we lived in were very simple timber buildings with earthen floors, and we spent the majority of our time working the fields and also fighting the neighbouring kingdoms on the ever-shifting borders of the kingdoms within the country that would become England. This was the moment that the bad boys of Europe decided to make their move.
Travelling from their homes in Denmark, Norway and Sweden, the Vikings arrived in Europe and swept all before them. Looting and pillaging with fire and sword, the 7 kingdoms that would become England could do nothing to stop them. 6 of them fell and only 1 remained, the kingdom of the West Saxons.
Known more commonly as Wessex, this was a part of the country that's situated right across the very bottom of England. Wessex no longer exists today. It's taken up by counties like Kent and Hampshire and Dorset and Somerset. And this was very much the last stand of the country that I know today, because if Wessex had fallen, I'd probably be speaking some form of Danish, and the British royal family that I know today would have been completely wiped out at the very start of their reign.
The man who would lead the final stand against the Viking threat was King Alfred of Wessex. A cunning warrior, Alfred realised as the enemy was at the gates that he had to defend the population centres of his kingdom. So he constructed great walls around the towns of Wessex, which came to be known as burhs or boroughs. The tactic worked spectacularly. So much so that Alfred now set about pushing the Vikings out of not just Wessex, but the whole of the country.
The Viking invasion of England, in the end, brought unity and the formation of the country that I know today. But the same can't be said when you look across Europe. Now, I'm certainly guilty of this, and it's so easy when we're looking at history to perceive it from our own perspective and our own point of view. And it gets really interesting when you broaden your horizons a bit and you start to look at what was going on in different countries, because as the Vikings were pushing Alfred into a corner here in England and allowing Alfred as a national hero to rise and to bring the country together, the same cannot be said for what was going on in France, because the Vikings were also sailing straight into France up the rivers, and they were raiding and pillaging. And with no unity and one national hero to get behind, the rich men of France decided to take things into their own hands.
In England, King Alfred had built defences to protect his people. In France, rich men built castles to protect themselves. It was 864 AD that we see the first ever use of the word castle. It was in a royal document out of the court of Western France, which tried to ban the construction of chastel, which is the old French word for castle. Interestingly, the word itself derives from the Latin castrum, which means fortified place.
So it was the French who invented castles to defend themselves against the Vikings. And it worked too. Whilst they couldn't push them out of their country, they could at least hold them back. In England, whilst the Vikings were pushed out and they left, in France they stayed and they settled in the north of the country, in a part of France that became known as the land of the Norsemen, or the land of the Normans, as it eventually became shortened to. In a very short time, it started to be known as Normandy. And as the generations passed, the Vikings who settled in Normandy very quickly embraced the ways of the French. They even started speaking French, and they also started to become experts at the castle building itself, the thing which had stopped them in their tracks in France.
In the now united country of England, all had been progressing wonderfully. Alfred's sons and grandsons had been successive kings of England until the year 1013, when the Vikings came back to haunt them.
They forced out the king at the time, a man called Ethelred. He's actually become known through history as Ethelred the Unready because he was completely unprepared for the attack that came. And instead of dying in a futile battle against forces he could never have defeated, he decided the right thing to do was to escape across the Channel and fight another day. So he headed to France and he sought refuge with his brother-in-law, the Duke of Normandy.
For the next 30 years, Ethelred lived as the guest of honour with his family at the court of William, Duke of Normandy. As the years progressed, he and his sons all tried in vain to win back their kingdom, until his last remaining son, Edward, remained. As Viking rule flamed out, Edward was invited back to England to take up his father's throne. The man at the centre of this plan was one of the most powerful men in England. His name was Godwin, and whilst he'd once been an ally of the Vikings, he now saw an opportunity. He made a deal with Edward. If he would agree to marry his daughter, Godwin would support Edward as the true King of England. And in the spring of 1043, as the daffodils came into bloom, he was crowned here at Winchester Cathedral King of England. Ever a man of his word, 2 years later, King Edward married Godwin's daughter Edith. The royal line was restored, and the future would almost certainly be bright.
But there was a problem. Edward's new father-in-law, Godwin, was not a very nice man at all. And as time passed, he started to hear more stories and get real concerns about the family that he'd married into. When he found out that Godwin had actually had the sort of key hand in the murder of Edward's own brother, he could hold his tongue no longer, and Edward had to act.
Edward's first act against his father-in-law was to start appointing men he knew and trusted into positions of power. Many of these men he'd met in Normandy, and with them they brought a technology never seen before in England. Historical records from the time list the moment this technology first appeared. It was in 1051. They were written by an unnamed monk, but he references that French men had started building mounds of earth with wooden towers on top, 3 of them to be exact.
The castle had arrived in England. Why did they suddenly appear? Because Godwin and his sons were spoiling for a fight. They didn't like at all the fact that King Edward was appointing men loyal to him. And what really enraged them was when they discovered that King Edward was deliberately not producing a son with his wife, who was, of course, Godwin's daughter. The straw that broke the camel's back, that, caused everything that was to follow to happen, was when Edward decided that the right thing to do was to declare the man who had protected him for so many years, his cousin, the Duke of Normandy, the future King of England.
With the support of his French allies and their castles, King Edward posed a formidable threat to Godwin and his family. Just as the fighting was set to take place, they realised they could not win, and they turned tail and fled the country. Finally, King Edward was free. He sent his wife to a nunnery, he confiscated all of Godwin's lands, and he got ready to rule his kingdom.
Sadly for King Edward, Godwin's retreat was tactical, and within a year he was back with an army so big, Edward had no choice but to give Godwin back his lands, to take back his wife, and to put everything back as it was before. You've got to wonder what it was that brought Edward to this realisation that he had to, after so much hard work of forcing Godwin out, just take him all back. You do have to wonder if Godwin had something over him. I don't know quite why he did what he did, but everything returned to exactly how it was before. And for 15 years, King Edward ruled as king.
As King Edward's 60th birthday approached, he grew more and more dependent on the sons of Godwin to take care of him and to govern his kingdom. As the Yuletide festivities drew to a close in 1065, Edward supposedly chose Harold, Godwin's eldest son, to be his new successor.
And they didn't have long to wait at all, because on the 5th of January, 1066, King Edward died, and Harold was immediately crowned King of England. You have to wonder, looking back through history, how this must have felt for what was the ultimate in sort of power-hungry families. Godwin, who died some years before, would have been so proud to finally see his son on the throne, and my goodness, they'd done a lot to get it. But they had a serious problem, because the Duke of Normandy, William, the man who King Edward had promised his throne, was preparing a vast army and a huge fleet of ships to come over and take what had been promised to him.
Across the sea he came with his Norman knights in tow, a story passed down to us today in the outstanding Bayeux tapestry. As summer turned to autumn in 1066, William met Harold at the Battle of Hastings and won his crown. What's so poetic about this situation is William was Duke of Normandy, the land of the Norsemen, the home of the Vikings, come to claim the land his ancestors had failed to conquer. And what did William bring with him? The architectural innovation designed to defeat the Vikings. William was a master castle builder, and he would now use them to gain complete control of England.
So what exactly does a castle look like, and how on earth do we even know? Well, we know because we're going to go and visit one. We're going to go and take a little look at Richemont Castle, known to us today as Richmond Castle. It was built in 1080 by a man called Alain Leroux. Alain was a knight, he was a French nobleman, and he fought alongside William the Conqueror in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And when trouble kicked off, which we're going to find out more about, here in the north of England, there was one man who William knew he could turn to sort it out, and that was Alain. So what Alain did was he came to the very centre of that trouble spot, that difficult part of England that he had to get control of, and that was right here. And he built his main castle and his home, and it's just over there. This is it. Welcome to Richmond Castle, built by Alain in 1080 AD, just 14 years after the Battle of Hastings. When I see you in part 2, we're going to use this spectacular place to get our bearings as we discover the layout of every castle that we're going to visit this series. This is a spectacular place to start because it's a proper Norman castle. So thank you so much for watching so far, and I'll see you later on in the show for more England, a castle nation.
So we're off. The story of the castle has been discovered. Can you believe it was the French?
I know.
I would never have anticipated that it was invented by the French to defend themselves against the Vikings. I mean, I think it's a valid thing that I said in the show, because you sort of perceive history from your own perspective and you never sort of look outside of your own bubble. And so, you know, to sort of look a little bit broader and to see is just fascinating. And then
Absolutely.
who brings it to England but descendants of the Vikings? It's all wheels within wheels.
All those Vikings' fault.
Like everything.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, actually, playing the Assassin's Creed Valhalla game, because that's set in England and it is you play a Viking.
Right.
And
Cool.
it is really cool because it's set right in this sort
they
of
have the
period. Horns on the helmets.
Stereotypically, is that
No.
the right word? Helmets.
No.
I'm sure they never did have helmets like
No,
that.
they didn't. That was
I wonder where that came from.
It was the film with Kirk Douglas.
Oh gosh, can you believe that?
Yeah, I know.
That's so
I mean,
funny.
it is just, you know, so interesting. That, but I suppose it makes sense in one sense because it's a visual adaptation which is sort of iconic, and so that then becomes what you think of. It's a bit like Father Christmas.
Yeah.
And, you know, Dasher Dancer being an invention of the guy who wrote The Night Before Christmas.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's where the reindeers and the names of the reindeers came from that little story. Is it a poem? Or
Yeah, it's a poem.
It's a very long poem. Is it Clement somebody or other, isn't it?
Attlee.
It's not Clement Attlee, he was a Prime Minister. I can't remember his name, but I'm sure Clement is somewhere within it. But you know, The Night Before Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they maybe do.
Yes.
Yes.
Possibly.
So yes, part 1 is done. In part 2, that's when Kay got really interested, because that's when we start to really sort of, well, that's when we get to the castle and we delve into just a few little tidbits, because this episode is very similar to the first episode of The Rise and Fall of the Monasteries in that it's establishing how the castle's got here and giving us a broad overview of what a castle looks like. Next time is when we get into the really sort sort of deep how
Yes.
people were living in Tudor times. But part 2, I think you're going to love. Kay really did.
I did.
Specifically, you really loved the whole, the archways over the doorways and all of those, but we'll find out all of that in part 2.
You will.
Right now, it's time for me to ask Kay Jones, what's off your needles?
I have 2 pairs of socks.
Wow.
How exciting. And the first pair is for Dan. I finished his socks that I was working on.
Thank you so much.
These lovely socks. So they don't fully match now. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but these are the socks. So I knit these using the Lendenor. Oh, I can't speak with the French even anything, but I'm presuming it's French.
Isn't it Italian?
Well, it's made in Italy, but that looks like French. Lendenor.
Why do I have a feeling they were bought out or something?
Oh, I've no idea. Did you look into it that
No, I vaguely
much?
remember. I think there was some talk of it in our patrons or something or other.
Right,
That's when I
okay.
found out about what you're going to talk about.
Right, okay, well, might be French, might be Italian, don't know, but it's this sock yarn I've shown you before. And yeah, I finished the pair. So what I didn't realise about this yarn is because this yarn comes in like a ball, and I just started knitting. I didn't wind it, I just started knitting from that ball. And I got to the second sock and I was knitting the second sock, which was this one, I think. And I got to sort of here and I looked down at my ball of yarn and I saw this really pale coloured bit of yarn, almost white. And I was like, that's weird. Why is that in the middle of my ball? And then I remembered that the other skein of this that I've got, that I've shown you before, it actually says on it 2 matching socks or something along those lines. And I was like, oh my word, is this skein the same? This ball band does not say that. So I didn't know it was going to do that. I didn't know there was going to be, it's like the, what's it called, that Reggie one, Perfect. It's like that, where you get 2 halves that will match, and in the middle of the ball there's a strand of yarn that shows you that that's the centre point, and it's like a white colour. And I was like, well, this is obviously what this is doing. So I thought, well, I'm not going to rip out all of the leg that I've knit already. What I will have to do, and it was round about here. So when I got to here and I hit that yarn, I just thought I'm just going to cut it and just wind off. I'll have to wind off the ball until I get to this part again in the second half. So that meant I had to wind off all of this, which is probably about 20 grams, maybe a bit less than 20 grams. So I had to wind it off until I reached the point of here where I was to carry on the stripe sequence. It was particularly tricky with this yarn because it's this gradient effect. So, when it's very defined stripes, it's quite easy to find where you are in the stripe sequence, but this was much trickier. So it delayed me, to be honest. It probably took me 15 or 20 minutes to sort all that out, to wind off this, to find where I was, to carry on knitting. But that's what I had to do. So this is the bit I wound off. So this is the remainder of the first 50 grams, if you like. So I reckon it's not 20 grams, it might be 14, 15 grams. But then this is what I've got left over from the second half. And they're not equal. Well, they wouldn't be equal, would they? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, I've got this amount left over. So for the heels and the toe, I used a Knit Pick Stroll, and it was Bamboo Heather was the colour. Really nice soft yarn. The paint sock isn't as soft as the Stroll, and the reason I would think for that is that this one is a 3-ply. I'm sure I looked at this and saw that it was a 3-ply.
Feels durable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels durable. Or is it even a 2-ply? I don't think it's a 2-ply. But it's not as round and bouncy as, normal sock yarn. I'm just looking at the end here to see if I can separate it off. It looks like 3-plies to me. So it's got more of a slight sort of rope appearance rather than that very round bouncy appearance you get with a 4-ply yarn. So I'm hoping these wear okay. I did have quite a few incidences through these socks where the yarn went quite thin. So I'm hoping that doesn't cause a problem. But they're all done, so you can have those now.
Thank you very much.
There you go. And then my second finished pair of socks is the Shorty pair that I was working on last time. This pair is knitted with yarn I dyed myself. I'm going through a peach phase at the moment, although these are more kind of golden apricot, I would say, than peach. They're definitely leaning more golden, I think. And I just popped in a stitch pattern that I made up for these. It's like a textured lace pattern, and this one also has a garter-edged heel flap. And I had a few people asking me after I showed them on the last show if I was going to release them as a pattern, and I didn't initially have any thoughts about that. However, I finished them really quick. I really enjoyed knitting them. The texture pattern, it's a straightforward and relaxing pattern to knit. I really enjoyed knitting them because Dan asked me that. He said, "Did you enjoy knitting them?" And I said, "Yeah, I really enjoyed knitting them. I knit them really quick." So that to me is an indication that other people might enjoy knitting them as well. So I have written up this pattern. I've called them my Spring Shorty Socks because that's what they are, Spring Shorties. And I'm in the process of getting these tested. So yeah, I will be releasing these cute little socks as a pattern. And what I've done as well, because these have got the garter-edged heel flap, I've included a video tutorial showing how I pick up stitches on that garter edge and then how I close the gap as well, because that's different. I find that that's different to a standard slip stitch heel. So that video tutorial is in the pattern. So as soon as these have gone through testing, I will let you know and I'll get them released because we're coming into spring now, aren't we? So I'm hoping it will be, sometime early March, I would say. Yeah, but very much enjoyed knitting these, and these will go into my sock stash. I think this is my third pair now for sock stash, which is the year-long knit-along that we're running with our patrons, where I'm knitting lots of Shorty socks. And I do have my next pair on the go, and I'm going to show you those, I think, next time. But yeah, I love knitting these, and I think they worked up really lovely. The stitch pattern, because it's got that it's got a pearl bump, pearl round in there, and the lace, they're a really lovely sort of stretchy fit. So very cosy. I always find socks like that, and I'll take them off the blockers and show you. I always find them really nice and cosy because they stretch really well over your instep. So they're my Spring Shorties. Pattern will be coming out soon.
Right. 2 gorgeous projects, 2 lovely pairs of socks, and it's always best when one of them is for me.
It's for you.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
There you go. Valentine's present.
Because we filmed this on Valentine's Day.
It's Valentine's today, which is rather lovely, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh,
so thank you so much.
I got these ones that I made myself, but I got my playlist,
So look, now is time to get back to the adventure. In part 1, we uncovered where the castle came from and how it got to England. And in part 2, we're going to discover how England became a castle nation. So let's return to me at Richmond Castle for more England, a castle nation.
Welcome back to England, a castle nation. This is Richmond Castle, built in 1080 AD by Norman nobleman Alain Leroux. He'd fought alongside William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings one crisp autumn day 14 years before. And now, as the new Norman royal family looked to flex its muscles and take control of the country, it was with castles like this that they did so. this wasn't the new King William's initial plan. His intentions were to be a good and lenient king, and it certainly looks like he tried to be in those first months and years following his coronation on Christmas Day in 1066. But trouble rose up across the country, as you would expect from a newly conquered people. And as William put that trouble down, he left the first proper castles in his wake. The first was built in London. In the years following, it's become possibly the most famous castle in England, known today as the Tower of London. Castles at Exeter, Nottingham and Warwick came next, closely followed by York. This is a perfect example of the first castle design featuring a man-made hill called a motte with a tower sat on top. To this day it sits proud in my hometown of York, offering spectacular views across the city. You can totally see why they built it.
Looking back at the history books, it really does seem like this was the extent that William intended to build. Just a smattering of castles in the problem hotspots. But there was a serious problem. The English saw the building of these simple castles as a provocation, and so they rose in open rebellion. And this wasn't some small insurrection. It was absolutely vast. All the native English noblemen of the north of England, all based right around here, they all rose up in one unified force, and they brought all their armies together. The fighting went on for months. 3 times the castle at York changed hands, and it was after that 3rd time that William finally changed his approach to governing his new kingdom. If his people would not respect him, he would not respect them. After crushing the rebellion,
He decided to make an example of the North, so he split his army into small raiding teams and sent them out into the countryside to destroy everything in their path. His intention was to ensure no crops or life could be upheld, and in this task he was successful. It became known in history as the Harrying of the North. Once completed, William now deposed all leading native landowners and brought in friends from Normandy like Alain Leroux. They were instructed to use any means necessary to keep the country in line.
this is the moment castles started appearing all across England. In 32 years, 500 of them were built. England had become a castle nation. But what on earth did these buildings look like? Well, to find out, the perfect place to start is the Bayeux Tapestry.
This spectacular piece of embroidery was made around 1075 AD. It's 230 feet long and 20 inches tall. It's separated into scenes which depicted each of the key elements of William's arrival in England. Look at this. It's the moment King Harold got shot in the eye with an arrow. It's the moment of William's victory. This, though, is what we're interested in. It's the earliest known depiction of a motte and bailey castle. You can see there clearly the man-made hill known as the motte with the tower on top. When we compare this to what we see at York, the comparison is really quite striking.
As the Normans started building castles all across the country, they adapted their original design. If they found a natural high point like here at Richmond, they wouldn't bother building the motte, the man-made hill. They would just stick their tower straight on top of it. And then we get to the surrounding buildings, the bailey, and this is where it gets really interesting. It also gets to the point of what we're doing here. Through this series, we're going to visit 5 spectacular castles, and all have a very similar layout. It kept life simple in medieval times. It's very similar to a monastery. A monastery, a monk arrives from a different house, they would know where to go, just the same as at a castle. A new knight arrives who's here to serve. Instead of needing to ask everyone where everything was, he already knew because that layout was so similar. So Richmond is going to be the way that we're going to learn the geography of a castle. And the story starts there. At the heart of every castle complex was the keep, just like what we saw at York, that white tower on top of the motte. This is Richmond's equivalent. And this really was the main point in any castle complex. But castles also had a bailey. That was a walled enclosure, and within that walled enclosure were all the things that a castle needed to keep it up and running. Richmond's still exists, and it's just down there.
This is the inner bailey, which would have been constructed along with the keep in 1080 AD. The reason it looks empty today is because most of the buildings here were fairly simple structures, often built in wood. Castles were self-sufficient entities, so within this area you would have found accommodation for about 50 people, stables, a blacksmith's, a grain store, a food store and a chapel.
All the really important buildings were constructed in stone, so the chapel still exists. Come on, I'll show you. The Normans were devout Christians, and when they arrived in England, they actually triggered very much a religious renaissance. William the Conqueror's arrival, it began the golden age of monastery building, but that is, of course, a whole other story. Devout Christians needed somewhere to pray, and whilst the castle was a building of war in effect, this was their chapel, and this is where so many of the community would have come to pray.
This is St Nicholas's Chapel, the one remaining of what would have been at least 3 chapels on site. The interior that we're looking at dates from the original castle, so Alain Leroux himself would have known this space intimately. The cluster of windows in the east wall features an arch flanked by roundels. This triple composition formed the backdrop to the altar, the centrepiece to the interior. The chapel would have been painted, and traces of red paint have been found in the arch behind the altar.
It's worth noting that St Nicholas Chapel that we've just left was actually gifted to St Mary's Abbey in York by Alain Leroux, the man who built the castle. That meant, gifting a chapel meant that any donations, any collections that were taken there, any gifts that that chapel received were given to St Mary's Abbey in York, and there's a very specific reason why he did that. Alain was the main patron of St Mary's Abbey in York, so he pretty much paid for all of the original buildings. And that makes me warm to Alain quite a bit, because anyone who watched my last series will know that St Mary's Abbey in York is the place that really captured my imagination when it comes to historical buildings. And had it not been for my visits to St Mary's Abbey as a child, I probably wouldn't have fallen in love with history quite as much as I did. Now, we're walking along the 11th century wall, and archaeological work has shown that these were very much domestic buildings. There was kitchens and grain stores, and the kitchen itself would have been served by this well. And as we come away from those domestic buildings, we're now making our way into what was the principal residence here at Richmond. there's been a lot of work done on these buildings, and we know, archaeologists have discovered, that this range originally stood 3 floors high. This was where the Lord and the Lady, successive lords and ladies of Richmond, would have lived. And we know that their main apartments also featured a chapel, and we can tell that there was a chapel because there's actually a sink. There's a sink recessed into a wall that would have been used. The other thing as well that gives away the different floors is that we can see the joist holes in the walls that show us where the floors and the ceilings would have been.
Where did the real action take place in a castle? The answer was the Great Hall. Sometimes a dining room, sometimes a bedroom, sometimes even a courtroom. It really was a place where anything important that was going to happen in a castle, it happened in the Great Hall. The one here at Richmond is particularly amazing because it's one of the earliest forms of the domestic architecture in the whole of the country. In fact, I think it might be the oldest. And the view from it up here is pretty spectacular. The entrance to all great halls was always pretty spectacular. This was the place most people who visited would see, and so it had to make an impression. Once inside, it was very similar to a refectory in a monastery. The ground floor would have been a hive of activity, with servers coming and going, and perhaps even musicians and poets waiting in the wings before making their entrance. And this is where they were all heading, the Great Hall. We can see the level it was once on by the joist holes in the sides there. That's where the floor was, and the Great Hall was above. It was sometimes used as a courtroom, as we'll find out later on in the series. The household would have dined here, with the most important people sitting at the high table, which would have been to our right. It was set up on a riser, given the importance of the people who ate there. It was the owner of the castle and his family and his most important guests. They would have sat in individual wooden seats facing into the hall. Down each side of the hall, long tables would have taken care of everyone else, who would have sat on long benches. The centre of the room was free for servers and most importantly for entertainment. That's where the poets and musicians would have performed whilst everyone ate.
When dinner was over, the Lord and his lady could make their way through this doorway because this was on the level of the floor in the main hall, and they could very quickly get into their private chambers. I find it absolutely tantalising. These are the moments that I just love when researching history, because we know that Alain Leroux, a man who fought at the Battle of Hastings, a man who was a friend of William the Conqueror, would have walked straight through that door and come in to this amazing space. And talk about a view fit for a king or a lord. Just take a look at the view out of this window. Talk about master of all he surveyed. Neil, the Great Hall wasn't the only space that was used for entertainment at the castle. There was one more intimate space that only the most important, even royal guests, would be invited to. And that lies in the castle keep. Before we make our way up the keep, I wanted to show you this. We're actually on the ground floor of the keep now, but when this castle was originally built, this was the main entrance. We know that because of the ornate stonework that's all around the archway. When the keep was built, this became the basement, and that's the reason now why it's all dark. We've made our way up onto the first floor of the tower, and the 3 windows that we see here have actually been filled in later years. Originally, when the castle was first built, these would have been open doorways, and they would have led out onto a balcony which protruded out beyond the tower. It would have enabled the lord and lady to walk out and be seen by their people. Whilst we discovered that this was a home, it was also a fighting machine. And it's an interesting point to note that the stairways all turn to the right. That way then, if the castle wall was breached, the lord and lady could make their final stand right here. And as most knights were right-handed, they could turn to the right to effectively defend themselves. Anyone who was coming up the stairs behind them. And also this little area here. If this feels like a doctor's waiting room, you'd sort of be correct. This was a bench which anyone who was waiting to come into the Lord's most sort of sacred and private chamber, they would initially come upstairs to the first floor. They would then come up to this small waiting area here before they were then beckoned into the ceremonial chamber beyond.
When they were finally led in, this was what greeted them, the Lord's private chambers at Richmond Castle. It would have been richly decorated with painted walls and hung tapestries. A carved wooden seat would have sat at the head of the room on a dais fit for the Lord himself. Food would not have been eaten here, as it's too far from the kitchen. This was a space to meet and greet the most important guests personally.
Medieval life was surprisingly theatrical. If you think about the curtains that used to be in this room, very much like what you'd find on a stage. You've got the stage where the lord and the lady would sit, and you also have backstage, a withdrawing chamber for them to go into before their guests arrive.
Used by successive lords and ladies of Richmond, this would have been such an intimate space. If we think of all the places we have in our lives for moments of privacy and calm, it's just fantastic to be looking at one from nearly 1,000 years ago.
As we come out of the withdrawing chamber, I must just show you this. If you look over the top of the stairwells, you can see a difference. If you look at this one on the right-hand side, there's an arch. It's quite ornate. But if you look at the one over the withdrawing chamber, it's completely plain. Now, the one with the arch, it's there to tell everyone that that is a thoroughfare. If I want to get around the castle, I look for either corridors or I look for staircases with an arch. If I want to get into a private room, I look for a completely plain doorway with no arch over the top of it. It's an ingenious way of helping someone new first arrive at the castle on how to find what's what.
For the next 500 years, the castles and the monasteries introduced by the Normans controlled every part of life for the population of England. For generation after generation, the balance between the secular and the religious enabled the country to thrive and grow. But then, in 1540, King Henry VIII closed the last of the monasteries and broke the balance of power.
Castles would now sit
at the heart of British life for the next 200 years. What would the future hold? That is the story that we're going to be discovering this series. How did castles become the homes that we live in today? How did a new religion appear out of the ashes that was the monasteries? And how did it all come crashing down in the English Civil War? This is the story of the foundation of the Western world. And when I see you next time, we're going to be visiting our first main destination, and we're going to be uncovering the story of one of our most famous dynasties, the Tudors.
So that's it. We're off. Episode 1 is in the books.
Well done, darling.
Episode 2 is coming soon with much improved sound. But it wasn't too bad, was it?
It wasn't too bad at all. I hope it didn't spoil your viewing. I'm sure it wouldn't.
Like I said, so sorry, but, we've now rectified the problem with a brand new mic. And after all the other things that we've got, we've now completely sort of overhauled a lot of our location filming, so we should be set now for the next. Because to be fair, those radio mics, we've used them since we started using radio mics, so maybe they needed an update. I don't know. Anyway, look, less mics, more action. Can you believe it? I mean, it is such a fascinating story, isn't it? Finding out where the castle came from, but now we're going to get to look at how it sort of exploded onto the scene and what life was like in a castle when it was at its absolute height. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, that's going to mean us really delving deep into what it was like to be just a normal person living in Tudor England. Yeah. Along the way as well, though, we're going to be telling the story of the monarchs who sort of took us to the brink and brought about the end of the castle. So it's a really fascinating story, and I'm just so excited. I'm really enjoying actually researching this. For the first time ever, I feel like a proper historian, because I've probably been building up to this, but I'm like researching from about 5 books all at once. I've always been is it monogamous reader?
Yes.
Yes, I've always been a monogamous reader, but I seem to have got to a point now where I can be polygamous?
I think so. Is it?
I have no clue what I'm saying.
We might be making words up at this point.
I'm just going to move on. So next time it is the return of Kay's Classic Bakes. And oh my goodness, is it a good one? The next 2 weeks of my life are going to be stupendous because the house is going to be full of delicious cakes.
I'll be trialling. Said I have made it before, but it's a long while ago.
That's how it became one of your classic bakes.
Yeah, so I need to remake it to make sure all is
This
good.
bake is me in a bake.
It is. And it's seasonal as well. Very seasonal it will be.
Very exciting. And it harks back to your first ever.
It does.
So
yes.
Marvellous. Look, it's time for the Endy Bits.
Endy Bits!
Oh yes, our radio show is back next week. It was off for a period because we've just had Valenbent.
Yes.
So we were lots of Valenbent content going out, and actually Valenbent concluded with the release. That leads me on to my next point that I wanted to mention. The latest issue of Knitability is out now.
Yes.
It's a Valenbent special.
It is. Valentine's special.
Yes. We call it Valenbent though because...
Oh, right, okay.
Well, Valentine's, it can be depressing for some people.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like Valentine's.
So forget Valentine's. Valenbent. Do we all love yarn? I think we do. So if you want to sort of cover yourself in gorgeous yarny stories, our latest issue of Knitability
is out.
Edited by our wonderful, Kay mentioned her earlier, Jen Keeler, done just the most stupendous job. She also wrote a great main article in the issue about her love of winter. So that is just, it couldn't be better for me, that. I love it. So that's out right now.
Brilliant.
Also, our next Pop Show, our next patron exclusive show, is on the 25th of February. It's live at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time for Silver, Gold and Platinum patrons. And then it's available to all patrons to watch whenever they like from 10 past 3 on the 25th of February. And we will be unveiling the next Platinum Pan.
Yes.
And it's exciting because we've had new patrons arriving for the last 2 or 3 months, all for this pattern.
For this pattern. Yeah.
So there is much excitement.
Much excitement. So that pattern is the Pop Socks will be coming out on the 1st of March. It's a pair
in the Pop Show?
In the Pop Show. And that's what they're named after.
Yes.
Because the patterns, the platinum patterns this year, the 3 that are sort of March, June, September, are inspired by us. So you get the Pop Socks in March, which I've shown you before. I finished them actually at the back end of last year. They're a striped sock it's a 2-colour sock, I should say. It's not self-striping. 2-colour sock with a lovely little detail at the colour change. And they're in pink and orange, the ones I did. Really pretty. Perfect for spring as well. And then in June, you will get the Endy Bits socks. I'm not going to give you any clues about those, but I have already designed them and I'm knitting them right now. And then in September, it will be the waffle socks. Now, the waffle socks will be a DK weight pair of socks. I said that like Detroit. DK pair of socks, because it's a good while since I've done a DK weight pair of socks. So those ones will be squishy, waffly DK socks in September.
Gorgeous.
So exciting.
Any Endy Bits from you?
Yes, I do have a couple of Endy Bits. One of them's a bit random, but I'm wearing a necklace today and I've worn this quite often. And every time I wear it, I get comments about it saying how lovely it is and asking me where I got it. And I always reply and tell people, but I just thought I'd mention it because it is a really beautiful necklace. You can see it's like made up of all these coloured sort of glass cubes. Really, really beautiful. And actually this was a gift from Dan when we were on holiday. And we got it from a little independent jewellery shop that doesn't have a website. I did check, and it doesn't have a website itself. However, the necklace you can get, from their own website. And I've still got the box because I keep it in the box. And this is the name of the people who made the necklace. So if you want to have a little screenshot of that and go and have a look on their website, you will find this necklace and everything else that they do.
Well, you could just save yourself a whole lot of trouble and just follow the link in the show notes.
Oh, well, there you go. It's a German company. They're in Stuttgart. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's my favourite necklace, and I do wear it a lot because I just love it, because it's all these different colours. It's like a rainbow colour. It just goes with so many things. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I'm working away at the moment on an update to my jelly roll blanket pattern. Now, over recent sort of months, I've had a lot of questions about knitting a DK weight version of the jelly roll. And I know that's something that's popular, and there's quite a few people out there that have been knitting up DK weight versions. But because I've been getting questions about it, only things like what needle size would you use, what stitch count would you use, how much yarn do you use, things like that. I thought, well, do you know what? I'm going to work up a swatch and I'm going to do an update to the pattern. So I've done a little swatch. This is fingering weight held double. And then I did just work one little strip in a standard DK weight. This is a new yarn to me, actually. This is Drops Daisy, which is a new yarn to me. But I thought I'll give that one a go as well, just to see what single strand DK is like and fingering weight held double. And there is a difference. So I'm going to detail all that in the pattern. So I just wanted to let people know, just in case you were thinking about knitting a DK weight version but thought, well, the pattern doesn't have it in. It will do. So hopefully over the next couple of weeks I will get that update done and I will let you know when it's there. Because what happens is if you purchased your pattern on Ravelry, which most people do, then you will get advised that an update has been done and you can go to the pattern and download the update. But I will let you know anyway when that has been done.
Cool. And that's it. Remember, if you are a Historical Adventure Series superfan, Just the same as actually with the yarn dye shows and also with the baking shows, we produce a special edition which we call our gold edition. It's like the director's cut, and that has additional reading notes in it and all sorts of lovely cool links. And that is available right now for England, A Castle Nation. And also, as well, it's available for Case Classic Bakes and also for the Yarny Book Club.
Indeedy.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, everybody.
And we will be back in 2 weeks. Remember, we're back next week with a radio show.
Yeah.
But the week after that, we shall be back with an episode of the video show that I cannot wait for. I will be a few pounds heavier by then because I'll have eaten much cake as Kate prepares for the next wonderful episode of Kay's Classic Bakes. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Who's it sitting and knitting? It's Dan and Kay, the bakery players. Enthusiasm's not quitting for Dan and Kay, the bakery players. They'll take you to fabulous places of which their favorites they'll share. You better buy a pattern and get yourself a bakery bear. You'll find yourself in a castle while watching the bakery bears. It never feels like a hassle to sit and watch the bakery bears. What's on your shelf or what's in your heart?